Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's a little chilly, but you can see it's spring. You can see it's
It,
spring. You can see the green
it's
grass.
spring, but you're pretty high up there because you can
Mhm.
see the tree line very definitely. Where is that? The High Rockies someplace?
It is. This is a national park I cannot properly pronounce, Deirdre, in the Canadian Yukon. Isn't this gorgeous?
Is that Cluane or
Yes, it
yes?
is.
I don't know that that's
My
how you pronounce
goodness.
it, but that's the
Yes.
yeah,
Well,
it's beautiful. Yeah.
that's the phonetic spelling. So,
Right.
yes, it is. Isn't it gorgeous?
Gorgeous. Yes.
Don't you? I just love the color of the water when it's there like that. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, this was last week.
Hmm.
So grass is greening
Grass
in
is
the
greening.
Yukon.
Yes.
What are we talking about today, Deirdre?
Well, the title that I've given this video is Get Serious About Working with These AI Models. And the reason it has that title is that we've spent four videos now, 62, 63, 64, and 65, showing people how to work with the models, giving people examples. But that doesn't quite get people to using the models themselves. So we're going to take a step. I don't want to say take a step back, but it's sort of that it's going to the point where, okay, we're going to tell you, here are your use cases. Here's how you make this human machine partnership that we keep talking about actually work. And then you're going to talk about the issue of documentation, which we both think is so serious and so important to the effective use of these models. And might as well jump right in because this is a lot of ground to cover. You challenged me a couple of weeks ago to come up with 10 use cases for these models. So, okay, I'm going to walk through them fairly quickly. And actually, what I'm going to do is give examples of five that involve creative work, the sort of work that we've shown in the previous videos, and that five that involve simply managerial work, even though it's the CEO who does this type of managerial work.
And Deirdre, just so that we make sure that everybody who's listening, if you haven't been following what we do, what we're coming at here is the point of view of how the C-suite, or specifically a CEO, founder, um, entrepreneur, can and actually should be using these models
Mhm.
because they're too powerful and they're too capable. If they're in the right hands, this is like any powerful tool. They can be incredibly destructive uh, through just small negligence.
Mhm.
But we're coming at it from how do you use these things in the most productive, most effective way? So the challenge was coming up with 10 good use cases for the C-suite.
Correct.
So,
And I'm actually going to start with one of the managerial ones because it's key to understanding all of these. And that is people who have watched our previous videos know that we keep asking three questions. One is, what am I missing? What are the motivations and are they aligned with mine? And is time my friend and enemy? And when we start to now go back and look at some of these creative uses, we're going to see how the question of what am I missing and what are the motivations here are just critical underpinnings and ways that these models can help. For example, one of the creative use cases is marketplace identification and analysis.
mhm.
Now, we all got in business school, all of these different models to analyze. But given the changes in the marketplace and the steady changes going on in the marketplace, you and I, Tom, talk about a shift from the industrial age to the digital age. You and I, though, have already started to outline the next phase, which is the move from plain old digital age to the human machine partnership
Mhm.
age here. So, how do you analyze a marketplace that's starting to move in that direction, even? And that's where a good use of these models help in this use case one, which is marketplace identification and analysis. What's going on here? Where can I best do this? how do I read this? Like, what am I missing when I'm looking at this potential marketplace? And does that tell me I have to look for a different potential marketplace? I'm moving through these questions really quickly, just to keep us moving in this conversation. But anyone listening to us knows that those are very deep, very intense, and critical questions. I tied in with the next use case, which is competitive positioning. Now, clearly, to do competitive positioning, you need to analyze your competition. Well, this is where what am I missing? What are the motivations become key questions. We theoretically know who our competitors are. But what am I missing out here? What are they doing? What have they said to the media that I haven't seen? And that one of these models, through its search capabilities, is going to surface? And I'm going to see the wording start to get a sense of intention, of how their thinking is changing, about where on a standard positioning matrix are they positioning themselves. And then what would I have to do to position myself in a place where I can compete better? Motivations are key here. You need to understand what their motivations are. One of the things you and I are seeing, Tom, as companies are struggling through all of these changes and struggling in the digital age and then into the human-machine partnership age, is that their motivations change. Not everyone can change their resources or their personnel or their marketplaces that quickly. So they need to go back and change their mission statements, go back and change strategies. Well, am I picking up when that is happening? This is what an objective search tool, thinking search tool, can help me pick up what's really going on here, so I know where I can position myself. Clearly, we've got a lot to say about that, but I want to keep going here a little bit because my next one is scenario planning. This is the standard what if planning. Now, if people have been watching the previous videos, they've seen us. You've actually been doing a lot of the guiding here, Tom. Ask prompts, ask questions through prompts, go back and ask a different question and get different answers. This is one of the ways that you can use this model. Given X, Y, and Z, or given what I've written out in this document, what next? Then let's change this parameter, what next? Or if my competitor does this, how does that change this competitive positioning? I feel I've got to make the point here, and we're going to be making this repeatedly, particularly when we talk human-machine partnership, Tom, is that these machines are giving us answers. They're doing a good job of giving us answers, but these answers are not in the context of the knowledge that the humans have here. So humans are going to have to interpret all of this. It's not as if these machines can do all of our scenario planning or all of our analysis for us. But they can get us to think. They can pick up things that we ourselves, for whatever reasons, might not be picking up and help us then determine what competitive positioning, what scenario planning, what sort of, and here is the next use case, drafting a strategy and drafting a strategy execution plan.
Yeah.
Now, these are the examples that you've been given as you've been talking through the previous videos. How do we start to come up with some sense of strategy? Now, the strategy execution plan has to go one step further because then you start to look at resources, not just money, but infrastructure and people and skills and bodies of knowledge and all of that, which help translate the strategy into a plan that can be executed, can show you where you have to, say, adjust your personnel or adjust your budget processes or adjust this and that. And again, from a purely objective view, without the context, these machines can do a good job of giving you ideas. that you then, as the human, work with. And we'll get to that in a little bit. I mentioned resource allocation, which is so important because that's my fifth creative use case. And this becomes particularly important. This is something you and I have been talking about, Tom, that so many entities, organizations, companies, not-for-profits, and so forth tend to get stuck in their strategies because of the resources that have been allocated in the past. They have fixed infrastructure that they can't change that quickly. They have fixed workforces. They have a lot of work to do to convert these things. So how do you start to understand what you would have to do to actually execute on a change in strategy? And that's where these models can start making suggestions. If this is your fixed infrastructure, where's the gap? What infrastructure would I need to execute here? What am I missing here? Or what people do I need? Where's the skills gap, which is a big one? How much does this cost? Give me costing information on this. Can I even, and here's a really big one, I might have this strategy, but this resource allocation analysis may tell me I can't do this. I just can't do this or can't do it this year. I have to take intermediate steps here in order to do this. And I'm harping on the question, what am I missing? Because as you and I know, Tom, all of us executives, and we've done this ourselves as CEOs and so forth, we have our ways of working, our thinking, our motivations, our biases. Now, you and I don't have biases, Tom,
Of course not.
of course not. But the possibility is there so that we may be thinking about things without seeing the reality, the clear reality in front of us. And one of the main virtues that I see in these models is that they may keep you from uh, not seeing the reality. They may force you to look at the reality in front of you, which is a tremendous benefit.
Yeah.
Given the investments that have to be made in this change, in this move into the expanded use of technology, and particularly into the expanded use of AI. And in a couple of videos, I think it's video 69, which we're filming in about 2 weeks, we're going to talk a lot about organizations, how organizations have to change to adapt these technologies and to do AI effectively. So I'm anticipating that point here, but I want to make it very clear here that you can't just roll up your sleeves and install a program and expect it to just be there. You know, the use of AI, that it involves significant organizational work, and these models can help you see where, so you know if you're on a right track in terms of marketplace, competitive positions, your scenario planning, and your strategy and strategy execution plans. So those are what I'm calling the real creative uses. But now let me move into some of these, or let me stop here, Tom, and ask, do you want to jump in here for a second?
Yeah. So I think that's really, really helpful. So let's talk about context. Why would you need help doing this? Because you are not the CEO of a Fortune 100. We don't call them that anymore. We call
Yeah,
them other things,
right.
but you're not one of those. So you don't have a staff of people to do this. You're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, you're maybe more than just CEO, you're probably CTO, you're probably the chief developer and probably the chief coder. So, you just don't have the time. And you and I have been there enough, including what we're doing now, the things we do now, where most of us don't have enough time for the creative aspect or don't have enough time for the productive aspect.
Right.
I wouldn't say it that way, but the research and the thinking versus the doing, that is very difficult to find the time to do that. And the thing that's so powerful about these models is they can give you a working partner. I talk about it being, a smart work partner to help you do this stuff. And then it becomes a skill to be able to have it give you what is meaningful so that you don't have to do all the work yourself. And that's the beauty. It becomes an issue of how do you get the best out of the model? Much like as a leader, how do you get the best out of an individual contributor or a team of people? And so that skill that you need to do that with people is the same as with the model because they're just as, for the most part, out of context, just as ill-informed about something because they haven't spent the time on it. They're not specific to your area or whatever it is. So your job is to influence them and to motivate them to go in the path you want them to do, but not do it in such a constrained way that you remove the creative, the aspect of imagination, all those sorts of things. The other side is that it helps with ideas because you and I both know it's rare that what the machine gives you is what you really want to do. It's more that it gives you it gives you another way of an informed creativity to get you to that actual answer. It's that next step where the next step isn't where you need to go, it's that next one. So, in all those cases that you gave, you can see how it could help you get to the answer quicker, more effectively, more thorough in its way of dealing with it. And we've done models in these past 4 videos where we've done examples of this so that if you want to see how you can go use this, that's why we did them in the way we did. We didn't do one that really applied to a business yet. We did that so that we could have a way to spark your imagination and how you can apply it to your own self. So what we're really getting at here is it's about the management of the model and thinking about it as it's your job to take that incredibly powerful tool you've got, which you may only be spending $20 a month, not only compared to the human, you're spending $20 a month for, or maybe even 200, depending on what you're doing. But learning how to use that properly to your benefit is a huge leg up, not because you can't do it, it's because of time. You are going to, we all know this from being entrepreneurs. You don't have the time to do everything you would like to do and want to do, and you have to triage. But your ability to sit down and do this, the problem that I've seen with it is that people, especially on this creative side, will not have a strong enough background themselves. And consequently, what they're missing is that they don't have the foundation they need, Deirdre, to be able to properly judge whether the answer is real or not, right? And that because it
Right,
surely looks real and it's convincing. Now we
right.
give you tips on how can you help see that if it's not obvious to you, right? If you're in territory that you don't know well, um, what can you ask the model to help you with that will signal that? And we'll go through some of these things, but that's how we're thinking about it. And so the purpose behind all these videos is right now we see a lot of things going on for CEOs, the problems they're facing, the issues they're facing. And yes, there's a lot of marketplace issues and disruptions and changes. Right now, there's just not enough there for us to deal with. But we look at this as being a key element. This point that you're on a minute ago, Deirdre, where you said, we believe rightfully so, that we're moving beyond just the digital age. It's no longer about productivity. It's
Right.
now, in my way of thinking, it's about the informed imagination for how you can use these. And the thing I know that you know that drives me crazy is people saying, well, these things are going to take over everybody's job. I mean, just the lack of any kind of informed imagination of what that allows you to do. This is the
Right.
point, that it frees up talent to do something. Now, if you're at a point in your life, your career, your motivation, your knowledge, your lack of willingness to learn, you're just exhausted because of some kind of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why you may say, I can't do it. I can't, so I opt out. That's fine. We're just saying for a professional that really wants to move forward and learn. By the way, if we think that's independent of generation, or it's independent of skill, it's independent of,
Absolutely.
physical location or language or culture or whatever, even biology. I mean, we see smart animals getting smarter too. Um, it's just about how do you do this in a way that is really meaningful and effective and efficient moving forward. So I'll stop there and I'll let you have the floor. But we feel incredibly strongly about this because I've used it now in so many different contexts, which
Yes.
Deirdre, beyond just the things that you all would see. It's incredibly powerful if you have a solid understanding of the tools that are available to you and you have a solid understanding of your base knowledge so that you can properly influence the capability of these models to give you meaningful output that we believe now is reaching into the C-level kind of work. So with that, I'm going to let you have the floor.
Okay, and just a short advertisement. Our next video is going to go into the whole job situation in depth, and we'll be recording that in a day or so. So, but
Yeah,
anyway,
because Deirdre, your point on that one is we're getting asked fairly frequently now by people that are, or by the way, are not people that are of our generation, right? They're people of generations of people that have been part of our teams and part of our influence, especially at our teaching at Columbia. Uh, and they're wondering, how do I even get noticed these days um, for a job?
right,
And my contention is it's not just that, it's how do you keep the job, right?
right,
You can get them. How do you keep them? How do you keep from being the person or because I believe it's going to be more person related. There's a whole issue of, okay, it's going to eliminate these jobs. Sure. But if somebody can see in you that you have the capability to be able to move forward and and more importantly, help the organization move forward with these kinds of initiatives. That's going to be critical. So we're going to talk about these things as it relates to an individual. And then,
right.
as you said, we're going to move then from the individual. So what does that mean for the organization? And how does the organization now deal with these topics?
Right. Just laying out for listeners the progress of what we're going to be covering over the next few videos. So remember what I'm doing now. I'm talking through some use cases here. The use cases that I've been mentioning so far are that entrepreneur, that executive who doesn't have the time, the executive who wants to do good strategy, the CEO who needs to develop a strategy and an execution plan. How do you use these models to get going? Where are the areas? And that's what I've been talking about. But I do want to talk now for a little bit about some of the managerial aspects here, which, by the way, seem to be a bit overlooked in the business press, not talking about real management. One of the things that every executive has to understand is that your people are already using these models.
Yeah.
And it is critical for you to know where this is happening and then understand what this means for the organization. I'm not just talking about, say, regulatory matters in relation to the use of data or things like that. But there are horror stories starting to enter the business press about people, oh, just using a model to write something and submitting that directly as their own work, which of course is a massive sub-optimization of what you hired that person for and so forth. But it's also that when these models start to enter an organization, they start to affect the processes of how work gets done. And you yourself have, as an executive, as even in the C-suite, have to understand what's happening so you understand where this might be affecting processes. And when we talk about organization, we'll talk about how you have to get on top of these things. You can't let some active users 10 levels down in an organization, for example, set the processes for the entire firm simply because they're working in some way. So if you use these models, you can start to see or get a sense of how these models are being used in your organization already. Another one, and this is something that anyone who's watched the videos can pick up from the way you were using Claude in particular, Tom, is that they're great synthesizers. You can, as a CEO, get reports from your 10 direct reports, dump them into Claude, and Claude will come up with a combined report for you. Something that you can then review, revise as needed, and you will need to revise this, but then it creates a first draft of, for example, an annual report or a report to investors or things like that, simply through its ability to synthesize the reports, top-level reports from a number of people in the organization. This is a massive time saver for anyone. Talk about productivity here. Another one is it is the ability to assess operations and results. That you and I, Tom, talk about the work of a leader. Or the work of leaders and managers as involving also assessing what's going on, assessing the operations, and then identifying what needs to be changed. By taking reports, by benchmarking the reports against set goals and metrics, that these models can pinpoint very quickly where something's going wrong, where something is off. It helps you in the assessment of whether the operations are operating as they should, whether you're on track to meet your goals, where the metrics are going haywire here. And then also that analysis points to where you might have to make adjustments in your strategy. Now, this is a context issue. You as the leader have to make the assessment of where to make the adjustments. That's context. That's your knowledge of the industry, your knowledge of the organization. But these models can help you get to the point fairly quickly of understanding that something's wrong here. So you have to focus in this particular issue. This is not just a productivity issue, given the speed that this can happen. This is also what I think of as a results issue. If your goal as someone in the C-suite is to drive the results of the organization, you need to make sure that what's happening in the organization drives toward results. And these tools can march you toward seeing where you're going to miss results, so you yourself can then make changes very quickly and optimize the results you're getting out of your organization. Also in creating information, drafts of information that you're going to distribute externally, information for the business press, information for recruiting, information for any sorts of external people, investors and so forth that you need. This is different from the formal reports that I was mentioning earlier. This is almost a lighter version, what you're prepared to go external on. And you know from watching our previous videos that you can give instructions to these models to write at certain levels and at certain tones. So you can select the information that you want for an external report of some sort, dump it into the model, tell at what level you want this, and out comes a document for you. Again, first draft of the model, but it's a much more effective process for doing this. So what I'm really talking about here, the underlying work, underlying all of these use cases is search, reporting, synthesis, analysis, comparison, and then generating drafts. This is all work operating at a certain level, what you, Tom, frequently call the bright new MBA, someone who hasn't worked in the company or worked in the industry, sort of a naive version of what's coming out here. But it gets you down the road and it gives you confidence in answering the questions, what am I missing? And how do I understand the motivations throughout this whole thing? And where do I see possibilities here? Um, so that's almost to get you going, to get listeners going and thinking about where you can actually start to use these tools to accomplish things. I think, Tom, and certainly in terms of time, we want to keep this video to a manageable time. I think we're prepared to dig more into the whole issue of the human-machine partnership. And I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to let you start in on this issue.
So what you're talking about here, it can be a tricky uh, subject. We take the term human machine partnership because we believe that the machine has a responsibility, and then you should equally have a responsibility, just as you would if the machine were a human producing that output. And one of the reasons you'll see I use a trick in the prompting is like a lot of people, you treat the machine like as you would a human being, and you treat it with whatever level of politeness or complete sentences or whatever you choose to do. I do it for fundamentally because I want to get in my mind that machine could be a human being, and I should be using the same approaches with that machine as I would use with a human if a human were doing it, so that I keep refining my ability to use that language and to use that style. We'll go into this more in the not next time, but the time after, where we talk about the disciplines that we've developed for using these models, the generic disciplines. But I think the more that you treat the machine as if it were a human, that is your responsibility, that works on your team, and you need to influence that to go in the right direction. But the difference is that just like with the human, you take them seriously, but only to a certain point. And just like I've seen before, I had this happen to me at one point where I was called up to present something to the then CFO of IBM, and I go in there, and he was very kind to me, and he asked me to come on. He was a very informal guy. He came from one of the car companies. He was brilliant, brilliant guy, and he was sitting there, and he just the moment I came in and started, he said, "No, go ahead, go ahead." And I knew him a little bit because I was working on his team. And he asked me to go ahead and start presenting. And the first thing he did was he grabbed the newspaper, dude, and he leaned back, put his feet on the table, and started reading the newspaper. I climbed in the newspaper, and I'm going, "Sir, do you?" And he goes, "No, no, no, keep going, keep going." And so I did my 15-minute presentation, and I get to the end when I'm finally at the summary slide, and he folds it up, and then he pays attention. He says, "Okay, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it." It was a recommendation for doing some work on pricing of our computers around the world. He'd already made up his mind. He just wanted to see, had I done all the work? He just wanted to pay attention, and he had his team around there just inspecting. Then when he got to the end, he made the decision, but he already had made that decision. I think you treat the model in somewhat of the same way. You kind of, and those of you that have watched some of these videos, you've seen I treat the models that way. I don't take them seriously until they're giving me the end I've worked it through enough. I'm kind of at the summary slide. And now I say, do I believe that, right? Or have I done this well? And we'll even show you that we'll give you an example of where I was just going the wrong direction on the way I was influencing the model. So I got about halfway through and I didn't believe the results. And we'll show you how to get there. And so I decided to start over. And I changed the whole model approach and same subject and got much better results. But I think not taking the model seriously until you believe the output is really important in all this. Because I've seen too many cases of people that just take the model seriously. They take the answer seriously right away. And we have some approaches to that. But I think those two, you should have in your mind, not should, but it's best to have in your mind an aspect of what is that end result that you're looking for? What does it look like? What kind of characteristics do you see it happening? And when it's not there, there are some things you can do to say, okay, am I just missing it? Because as you said, Deirdre, I haven't asked it to give me something that will show me that because maybe I haven't been paying attention. I've been reading the newspaper, right, expecting that by now you would have been done and you're not, or it's not there,
Mhm.
right? It's just not there for whatever reason. So I think that it's important that you've developed this relationship. And so what is that? That's what this human machine relationship, we're talking about the partnership. How are you working with this thing? Because it's not a productivity tool. It can be. It's a huge productivity tool in a lot of ways. It's much more than that. It has a creative aspect to it, and and creative in the form of synthesis, right? Where it will take what it can get its hands on and it can infer mostly from what it has learned. And that could be what you've told it, what you've directed it to do, and then what it finds on the outside. And you can control a lot of that. But you have to be able to establish that. You have to choose the models as models that you would, just like you would choose a human. So, just because Jerry York he had decided a while back, every time I came in there, he wanted to see my end result, but he wanted the rest of the people in the room to go through the details
Right.
because he just wanted to see the result and then be able to ask me questions if he had any. You have to know what you want in these things. And he was not being, I learned later that it had nothing, it was not being dismissive. So it's not being dismissive. It's just having a sense of you know what you want out of this. So it's what you and I call informed influence. It's informed decision making. It's informed imagination. You've been able to, and we were talking about Einstein, that or any of the great scientists, this stuff just doesn't come out and come to them in the middle of the night. It comes to them in the middle of the night because they've built this incredible foundation to get them halfway up the hill. And then
Right.
they leap to the top of the hill. They don't leap to the top of the hill from the valley very often,
Right.
unless they're true geniuses. Most of the time, they leap to the top because they've built themselves halfway up. And most of the time, people that have that ability to do that well, they don't even use traditional methods to build that halfway up. They try. They go to one semester at a great university and say, I'm going to do this myself. Or they never go there in the first place. But it's about thinking about it in a similar way, that you don't take it too seriously and you test it against your knowledge and the foundation you've built. So I know you have, and this is your point. The way I'm describing it right now means I'm involved with it. I don't just say, answer this question, and then I run with the answer. There's a process that I use to get what I think is a great answer. And then when you don't have that foundation built, there are some things you can do to test it. And we have methods of doing that. But again, develop your own thinking about this. But it's rare that you should take what you get in this kind of an application, take what you're getting. I've done enough work and done enough studies using the outputs of these models where even in incredibly professional and scientific applications, you cannot always rely on either the human or the machine to get it right. The always to get it right. So I'll stop on this piece and let you take now, because we use that term human machine partnership, and you constantly work on this because you're worried that people will rely too much on the model. my way, they're just taking it too seriously, right? They're just saying, okay, it did it. Why should I even waste my time on it, right?
Right. And along those lines, Tom, it may help for people to understand what they're actually getting when they prompt a machine for
Mhm.
something. That remember where this information comes from. These models have been trained on all of this data being scraped from the web and all of that. And the algorithms are trained to work with the information in certain ways. So that if you sitting at your desk and 20 other people sit in various positions around the world, pull up the model and ask it the same question, odds are that the answer that all 20 of you will get will be the same thing. It's an answer completely out of context because you're just getting going there. And what you have to do as the person using the model is use the prompts to guide the machine to work with the information and move toward what you want out of the
Right.
machine.
Yes.
And that's why we talk about it's a dumb machine. It needs the guidance of the human to move it toward what will make it useful. I think my run through of the use cases shows that it can be tremendously useful, but you, the human, have the responsibility of getting it to the point where it creates that utility
Yeah.
through
And let me
the
give you an example, Deirdre, that really helps. If you really would like to see this in action, our first video on this subject was, I believe, 62, right? Where we go through and I just do a quick analysis. I dump a bunch of information about myself and our business in one of the models, and we do or both two models, and we do a quick, what if I wanted to start a business in this particular physical location? What could I do? And so I'm asking it to do that market analysis you just said, a new market analysis. And it gave me, when I got into competition, now I don't know that market very well. It happens to be a place I love to be in the summer times, but I don't work from there, right? But if I were going to start a business there, how would I do this? What it was doing, you and I look for who are the competitors, meaning I want the names, I want exactly what their backgrounds are, I want to know how they're going to market, what their pricing is, what the likes of the customers are, what the dislikes of the customers are, what their individual pros and cons are in that marketplace, what the market needs, right?
right.
And then but I want to know it at that level, right? So I already know you and I have a preset view of what level do we need, and we're down at the individual competitors, right? And understanding them deeply. It didn't give me that. And it
No.
took 3 or 4 turns of the crank, more like four, I believe, to actually get at that. Now, when I didn't see it, by the way, the problem was the first output sounded pretty good. And it
Right.
sounded like there's a lot of opportunity there. I still think there is if you wanted to do what it's identified. But to really understand it, you had to keep going deeper. And the more deeper you went, the more it influenced how it was using your background to try to fill that strategic gap, whether you would have emphasized that or not in the way you wanted to move forward. And so this is how we use that one as a way to show it can do incredible work for you that may take, if you tried to do this on your own, would have been incredibly expensive, both from a time, a resource, and a commitment point of view to be able to get to that point. And we identified some things, but it took things out of my background and emphasized those that we could fill a gap that's in the marketplace. And I wouldn't want to do that. That's not where I want to emphasize. I'm doing that as a hobby, not as something I want to turn into a profession. There are a lot of people that might like to do that. So that's your
Mhm.
point about it's going to give you aspects of what it already knows. It sees the market is in need of this in that area, and it sees you have a background in it. Boom, I'm going to stick you in there. It may be a good thing, it may not be a good thing. This is where you have to decide what you want to do. And this is what we talk about not taking the model too seriously, because you could have stopped after the second turn, even the third, and thought, you know what, I've got enough here. There's opportunity. No, I wanted to know the name of the people and what do their customers say, likes, dislikes, pros, cons. What is their pricing structure? And we found out there is nobody doing some things that you and I do there. Now, the question is, do we want to do that? Well, I think it involved much more personal contact where we'd actually have to give personal seminars in conference rooms. And if we're going to go up there, Deirdre, I want to go into the beach, and I know you're going to want to go into the nature preserve and bird, right? Because
Right.
it's a famous one up there on the
Right.
island. Um, and it's funny we talk about that because you and I haven't seen each other, what, in 2.5 years, maybe even longer,
In person, right? Yeah.
right? In person, right? But um, but it can be incredibly useful and it can give you ideas. I mean, since the day I did that, when I had no intention of actually doing anything, I keep thinking, I wonder if we should do something, right? And this is the point about it can help you with thinking about things. Now, there are some things that would keep me from doing it on my own side, and we haven't even talked about it on your side and whether it fits our long-term vision or not. That's a whole different issue. But it's caused me to open up that mind that the machine sparked on my side. So this is what we mean about how it's that knowing, having that sense of knowing what that informed sense of knowing what you want the outcome to be, and then making sure you're leading it just like you would a smart person you've hired that had 3 or 5 years of experience somewhere else, went back to business school, and now is coming to work for you, and you're trying to get the most out of their capabilities.
Mhm. Right. And I think what you've been talking about, Tom, and this is a very simple thing to say, but I want to make the connection here for our listeners. Everything you were talking about in creating Video 62, all of the prompts you gave, all of the turns, that's what we mean by providing the context.
Yeah.
That we use the word context, but that's what it is. That if we have this machine that is full of data and is going to work with these data the way it's been trained to work with them, you have to provide the context. You have to tell it what you want. You have to give it the knowledge of the industry, the knowledge of the marketplace, the knowledge of your type of customers, the type of work you do. Not that you're giving it answers. You want it to suggest answers, but you want to give it enough so that it can start to sort through all of the information that it has. And it's got terabytes of information there that it's sorting through. So it can start to drill down to the suggestions that you find useful. That's what we mean by context, that you know where you want to guide this. We also use the word guidance. That's where we'll do it. You know how you want to guide this to reach the type of results that will be useful to you and prompt your thinking. So the machine can do nothing without the guidance of the human. And unfortunately, as you've said, we see too many times when humans have just thrown a question at it, figuratively ripped the answer out of the typewriter and handed it in, and it is nowhere near anything that's either appropriate or useful for the situation. But that's where this partnership comes in. We keep hearing about what incredible marvels these models are, but they're incredible, but they can do nothing useful unless guided by the humans. And that's where the partnership is formed. And it's,
And there's a lot of discussion about models acting on their own.
yes,
And yes, can you set them up to act on their own? You bet you can. Just like you can set a fire in a certain way to engulf your town, right? If you set it up properly.
right,
We're talking here about the ways that you would use the machine.
right.
And we believe that the more you understand and use these things in more advanced ways yourself, rather than just productivity ways, but you use them in more creative ways, informed creative ways, you will begin to understand what the reality is in terms of the how these models can get out of control or be used improperly. And so, yes, can you and I set up the models to do things that are not good? Absolutely. And could we set them up using robotics to do things that might destroy things? Yeah, we could. Now, you, it's important to know they can do that, but that's not what we are talking about. We're not working on that side of the problem. And so when we say without the human, they're no good, what we mean is in a productive way, right? that yeah, they're scare tactics, but it's like anything else saying that fire is dangerous. Yeah, we know that.
Right.
And so we know how to properly use it. We want to stay on the proper use of it. There are other people that'll work on the other side of this thing. Um, but we're on the side of properly using. And it gets to the last point, Deirdre, that I want to get to, or you and I want to get to, which is what is it? Where is the end result of this? Look, ours is to know in the end, when you have got something that you might be able to use, how did you actually get there?
Yeah.
Right? And so we have a way, and we keep talking about things we'll talk about in the future. It's almost, and I hate that because you want people if they're going to tell you now, right? I'm sorry we're doing that, but we want to at least let you know there's a great deal more here. But we needed to make sure that we stopped and said, okay, let's get serious in your terms. Let's get serious about how we're using this inside our own organization. How do we get started? And one thing is that it's documenting your prompts. How did you influence the machine? And we will in the future, we'll give you this, but you can see this in past videos where I can be influencing it in certain ways. We're actually going to go to the point of, we're going to give you an example of where we confused the machine. And we confused it by giving it too many guardrails. And it then just ignored what I did and wrote as if it were an academic writing because it had picked up that both Deirdre and I have an academic background. So when it couldn't make sense of me having given it various instructions that seemed to be conflicting, but they weren't, but it interpreted them to be, it defaulted to knowing what our bios were and took that common thing and then started writing like an academic, which was incredibly dense. We would consider run-on sentences, paragraphs that are a mile long, things you could not read out loud and make sense of, things you'd have to study and parse. And we were getting this result, and it was just maddening. And it became clear that that's what we had done. So to Deirdre's point, it's taking and trying to give you the best it can with what it's got and what you've helped it get. And so will the same answer happen? It may be the same. If you ask the same question as somebody else across the world, it's certainly going to use the central theme if it doesn't see another way, right? It's looking for a proper match. And because it's all about optimization, that's what these models are all about, is optimizing around something. And does it do it within certain constraints, or how open do you leave it? But and that's why the original way of thinking about this was when I started learning about it years ago, there were predictive machines, right? But they were thoughtful predictive machines as opposed to just rote, meaning mathematical predictions. Okay, it's always been growing at 20%, so we're going to continue growing at 20%, as opposed to what kind of changes are there in the context now that might change that, and what it might change to, and how does that affect the predictability in the future? So with that, one of the things we see is with keeping a record of how you directed the machine to get to the various levels of output, and you keep track of all your prompts as a set of records, and also what the machine gave you as far as output. What you can see is how much you influenced and in what ways you influenced, because one of the ways you and I have um, triaged situations where we're not getting what we want. And what do we do? How did we get here so that we don't keep going down the same path? We look at the prompts. What did we say and what did it give us? And you can start seeing how it happened. Just like a human being, right? And it'd be just like what a human being would do. They'd say, oh, Tom and Deirdre are academics. I'm just going to write this as I wrote my term papers in college, right? And as opposed to writing in a conversational style, one that you can understand the first reading through, that sort of thing. So the point behind this is keep track of your prompts and keep track of the output you got as a result of those prompts so that later when you go back and start to use this, because you may find you're doing this on the weekend, which frequently is times I do a lot of the research stuff and the thinking. And then I find I'm using it on Thursday and I don't remember how I got it where because I'm doing so many things, just like all people that are running businesses. And you have to refresh, how did I get there? Well, you go back, if you've got a record of this stuff, you can go back quickly and figure out where were you and how did you get there. It is also the way that you can not only check your own work, you can check your kids' work if they're using it by asking them to show you what they asked the machine all along the way to give them the output that they're trying to get ready to turn in for their homework. It's also the exact way you and I would deal with it in a classroom, using it for not only for the work of the class, but also for the way you teach. And we have a whole set of things we'll be talking about in the future about how we would design a whole different curriculum for a master's degree in business or technology, um, the management of technology, using these models as part of the curriculum so that when you get out, you have this knowledge and you're not learning it to when you start to be a founder or an entrepreneur. So with that, Deirdre, I'm going to let you have the final word to wrap this up. It's about the use cases, it's about the human machine partnership, and it's about the how do you make sure you know where you were in all this and the influence? It's the documentation of it. And then we'll turn to the more concrete examples in the next few videos.
Just a very high overview, Tom, that we've talked about the possibilities and we've also talked about the limitations and how it's your job as the human in this partnership to make up for the limitations, to supplement, if that's the wrong word to use, to work with the machine to make sure that you're getting the result that you need going forward. But it takes recognition on your part as to what's being produced and what you need out there. In other words, don't believe this thing simply because it came out of your printer. Or you see it on your screen. You have to approach it as an intelligent, knowledgeable person with the context and your guts that we keep talking about, your leadership guts, and use this as an input to help you do your work. And you will then use it appropriately and well and benefit from the use. And we'll talk more about this over the coming videos.
Yes. Deirdre, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long.